While I was swimming at the pool, the lifeguard asked me, "When do you think you'll drown?" "I can float for a couple minutes, why?" "Don't move and don't leave the water no matter what. We need to clear it and evacuate everyone else, but you need to stay." "What's in the water?" My voice came out shaky. He didn't answer. Instead, he raised his whistle and blew 3 sharp blasts that echoed across the pool area. "Everyone out of the pool immediately! This is not a drill." Families started rushing toward the ladders and stairs in a chaotic scramble. Kids were crying as parents pulled them out, water splashing everywhere. The shallow end emptied in seconds as people grabbed their belongings and ran. I wanted to join them, but I was stuck floating in 12 feet of water trying not to move. "Hold still." The lifeguard kept his eyes locked on the water around me. I was trying my best, but my arms were already getting tired from the careful balancing. The sun beat down, and without movement, the water felt colder. Some families had stopped at the fence instead of leaving completely. A few called out encouragement, telling me to relax and breathe and stay as still as possible. Others had their phones out recording whatever was happening. I could see the little red lights pointing at me from multiple angles. 3 other lifeguards appeared with long-handled nets used for cleaning debris. They spread out around different parts of the pool, moving slowly and carefully. The one nearest to me kept the net raised, ready to strike at something. Their faces were all focused on the water like they were hunting. My breathing quickened despite trying to stay calm. Something was in the pool with me. Something dangerous enough to evacuate everyone else but keep me frozen in place. The lifeguards crept along the edges, scanning every inch of water. One of the lifeguards near the diving board suddenly plunged his net into the water. He struggled with something heavy, pulling and twisting the pole. The other guards rushed over to help, leaving me unwatched for terrifying seconds. Together, they hauled up their catch and my blood went cold. An alligator thrashed in the net. Not huge, but big enough at maybe 4 feet. Its tail whipped back and forth as they struggled to control it. The crowd at the fence gasped and more phones came out. Someone called animal control while the guards carefully carried the netted gator toward the pool house. But the lifeguard assigned to me didn't relax. He kept scanning the water around me with the same intensity. That's when I understood. If there was one, there might be more. "Can I get out now?" My voice cracked with fear. "Not yet. Stay still." He pointed to something in the deep end. A dark shadow moved along the bottom. Slow and purposeful. Much bigger than the one they'd caught. The guards saw it too. They all shifted positions, trying to get an angle with their nets. But it was too deep. Too far from the edges. "It's circling under her," one of them said quietly. My whole body trembled, sending ripples across the surface. The shadow continued its lazy patrol of the deep end. Sometimes closer to the surface where I could make out its prehistoric shape. Sometimes deeper where it became just a dark blur against the blue. Then someone in the crowd screamed, "There's another one in the shallow end!" All heads turned to see a smaller gator that had been hiding near the steps. It must have been there the whole time while families evacuated right past it. One lifeguard ran over with his net while the others stayed focused on the one beneath me. Animal control arrived in a van pulling up to the pool gate. 2 officers in heavy gloves and protective gear came in with specialized equipment. They took over netting the shallow end gator while assessing the situation with the larger one. "How big is the one under her?" the officer asked. 6 feet at least. Maybe 7. The lifeguard's voice was grim. They discussed options while I floated helplessly above the predator. They couldn't net it from the edges. The pool had no drain access to empty it quickly. Tranquilizer guns risked making it thrash and attack. Every solution put me in danger. "We need to get her out without triggering its prey drive." The animal control officer studied the gator's movement pattern. They decided to create a distraction. One officer went to the opposite end of the pool with raw chicken from their van. The plan was to draw the gator away while I swam to safety. But gators were smart. It might not take the bait. When I give the signal, swim straight to the ladder. Don't splash, don't panic, just smooth, steady strokes. The lifeguard positioned himself by the nearest exit point. The officer dropped the chicken into the far end of the pool. The splash made everyone hold their breath. The shadow stopped circling. For a moment, it stayed perfectly still beneath me. Then slowly it began moving toward the bait. "Wait for it." The lifeguard held up his hand. The gator reached the middle of the pool. Still too close, but getting farther. My muscles screamed from staying rigid so long. The crowd pressed against the fence, recording every second. "Now! Swim!" My arms pushed through the water in the slowest, smoothest strokes I could manage, while every instinct screamed at me to thrash toward safety. The ladder was only 15 feet away, but it felt like miles as I forced myself to glide forward without splashing. Behind me, I heard the wet sounds of the gator moving through the water toward the chicken, and I kept my kicks small and controlled. My fingers stretched out and finally wrapped around the cold metal rail of the ladder. I pulled hard and fast, my right shin scraping against the rough concrete edge as I scrambled up. The lifeguard grabbed my arm and yanked me the rest of the way out while the crowd around the fence erupted in cheers and clapping. My legs turned to jelly the second my feet hit the pool deck. Someone threw a big beach towel around my shoulders as my knees buckled and I dropped to the concrete. My whole body shook so hard that my teeth clicked together even though the Florida sun was beating down hot. Curtis Berg walked past me toward the pool edge carrying a long metal pole with a loop at the end. His partner held up a thick plastic board like a shield, while they moved closer to where the big gator was still investigating the chicken. They worked together like they'd done this 100 times. Curtis extending the pole while his partner blocked any potential lunges. The gator's tail swept side to side as Curtis tried to loop the catch pole around its neck. The pool manager rushed over to me with a clipboard clutched in his hands. He kept asking if I was hurt and shoving papers at me while water dripped off my bathing suit onto his forms. His face looked more worried about getting sued than about whether I was actually okay. I couldn't focus on his words because my phone started buzzing like crazy in my bag on a nearby chair. Someone must have grabbed it for me during the evacuation, because I'd left it by my towel at the other end. I pulled it out with shaking hands and saw notification after notification popping up on the screen. Seth had already posted a video with the caption, "Girl vs. Gator Insane," and it had dozens of shares in just minutes. Seeing myself floating there helpless while people filmed made my stomach turn sour. The primary lifeguard walked over and sat down next to me on the concrete. He told me his name was RJ, and made a weak joke about how I definitely didn't need swimming lessons after that. Just having someone sit there and talk to me like a normal person instead of a liability helped my breathing slow down. A woman in a blue uniform with a medical bag knelt in front of me and introduced herself as Thea Pacheco. She checked my pulse and blood pressure while asking me questions about how I felt. She suggested I should go to the hospital for shock treatment, but I shook my head stubbornly at first. After a few minutes, she convinced me that at least I should have someone stay with me tonight to watch for delayed reactions. Curtis walked by carrying equipment back to his van and mentioned something that made my fear turn into anger. He said they'd gotten 3 calls about gator sightings in the retention pond behind the pool just this month. 3 calls, and nobody had thought to check the fence or warn swimmers about possible danger. The pool manager heard him and his face went pale as he realized how bad this could look for them. More people kept coming up to check on me, but I just wanted to go home and process what had happened. My legs felt steady enough to stand after about 20 minutes of sitting on the deck. The manager kept trying to get me to sign his papers, but I told him I needed time to think about everything. RJ helped me gather my stuff and walked me to my car to make sure I was okay to drive. The parking lot felt weird and normal at the same time, like the world should have stopped but didn't. I sat in my car for another 10 minutes before I felt ready to turn the key and head home. The drive took forever, even though my apartment was only 5 minutes away from the pool. Every dark spot on the road looked like it could be moving, and I had to keep reminding myself I was safe. Inside my apartment, everything looked the same, but felt completely different somehow. I dropped my wet bag by the door and went straight to the bathroom to rinse the chlorine off. The shower helped wash away the pool water, but not the feeling of that shadow circling beneath me. I put on my softest pajamas, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon, and curled up on my couch. My phone kept buzzing with messages from people who'd seen Seth's video, but I couldn't deal with that yet. Every little sound in my apartment made me jump and check the shadows in the corners. The air conditioner clicking on sounded like something moving, and I had to turn on every light to feel safe. I grabbed my laptop and started typing everything I could remember while it was still fresh in my mind. The words poured out in a jumbled mess about floating there and seeing the gator and feeling completely helpless. Writing it down helped make it feel more real and less like some crazy nightmare that couldn't have actually happened. By the time I finished typing, my hands had finally stopped shaking, and I could breathe without my chest feeling tight. The next morning, my phone woke me up buzzing nonstop on the nightstand. I grabbed it and saw dozens of notifications from people I barely knew sending me links to Seth's video. My stomach dropped when I opened it and saw the view count had already hit 50,000 overnight. The comment section made me want to throw my phone across the room. Half the people blamed me for not getting out when everyone else did, saying I was stupid for staying in the water. Others claimed the whole thing was fake and staged for attention. Someone had even slowed down the footage trying to prove the gator was CGI. I scrolled through hundreds of comments calling me an idiot, a liar, an attention seeker, and worse. My hands started shaking again and I had to put the phone down. The pool manager called while I was still in bed trying to process everything. His voice sounded nervous and rushed as he asked how I was feeling, then immediately launched into why he was really calling. He needed me to sign a statement saying the pool wasn't negligent, and this was just a freak accident nobody could have predicted. Something about his pushy tone and the way he kept repeating that the pool had followed all safety protocols made my stomach turn. I told him I needed time to think about it and hung up before he could pressure me more. Later that morning, I called the pool office asking for a copy of the official incident report. The secretary transferred me to 3 different people who all gave me different excuses about why they couldn't send it yet. One said it wasn't finished. Another said I needed to file a formal request, and the third claimed they needed manager approval first. My usual habit of just accepting whatever people told me started cracking. I kept asking questions about when it would be ready, and who exactly I needed to talk to. Seth texted me a long apology around noon about posting the video without asking me first. He said he got caught up in the excitement and didn't think about how it would affect me having it go viral. He offered to help set the record straight online and post an update with the real facts about what happened. Part of me was still hurt that he'd violated my privacy like that, but I appreciated him recognizing he'd messed up. We started texting back and forth about what information to include in his follow-up post. That afternoon, I drove back to the pool to grab my sandals I'd left behind in the chaos. The place was completely empty with yellow tape across the entrance. I ducked under it and walked around to where I'd been sitting. My sandals were still there by the chair along with my sunscreen and water bottle. As I picked them up, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The perimeter fence had a rusted latch that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. Near the bottom was a gap where the fence had pulled away from the post, definitely big enough for a gator to squeeze through. My hands shook as I took photos from every angle. That evening, Curtis texted me privately with something that made my anger burn even hotter. He sent screenshots of call logs from his department showing they'd received multiple reports of gator sightings near the pool dating back 2 months. 2 whole months of warnings, and nobody had thought to check the fence or increase safety measures. The validation that this wasn't just bad luck but actual negligence gave me a new determination to push for real answers. The primary lifeguard reached out asking if I wanted to meet for coffee to talk about what happened. We met at a small place downtown where he looked around nervously before telling me he'd raised safety concerns about the fence weeks ago. His supervisor had brushed him off, saying it wasn't in the budget to fix it yet. He was scared to speak up publicly because he needed his job, but wanted someone to know the truth. We sat there for an hour sharing what we each knew, and forming an alliance based on our shared need for the truth to come out. 3 days later, I was in the shower when the sound of running water suddenly transported me back to floating in that pool. My chest tightened and I couldn't breathe as the memory of that shadow circling beneath me flooded back. I had to turn off the water and sit on the bathroom floor until the panic passed. That's when I finally admitted I needed help and booked an appointment with Jada Whitfield, the school counselor who also did private practice. The city posted an announcement on their website that the pool would be closed indefinitely pending a full safety review. Part of me felt relief that nobody else would face what I went through, but I also felt bad for all the families who relied on the pool for their kids' summer activities. The whole community routine was disrupted because of something that could have been prevented. Then Seth forwarded me an anonymous message someone had sent him through social media. A city employee claimed they knew for a fact that the perimeter repairs had been repeatedly delayed due to budget cuts. The message included dates when the work was supposed to happen and when it got pushed back each time. This information turned my scattered anger into focused determination to document everything properly and make sure people knew what really happened. I sat at my kitchen table that night with my smartwatch connected to my laptop, scrolling through the data from that day at the pool. The heart rate graph showed exactly when everything started, jumping from 72 beats per minute to 143 the moment the lifeguard told me not to move. It stayed high for the entire 23 minutes I was trapped in the water, with spikes reaching 160 when the big gator circled directly beneath me. I took screenshots of everything and organized them into a folder along with the fence photos and the information Curtis had sent me. The next morning, I printed copies at the library and put them in a manila folder, my hands steady now with purpose instead of shaking with fear. The City Recreation Board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community center, and I spent the whole week preparing what I wanted to say. I practiced in front of my bathroom mirror, timing myself to keep it under 5 minutes, making sure I stuck to facts instead of getting emotional. When Thursday came, I wore my most professional outfit, a navy blazer I'd bought for job interviews, and arrived 30 minutes early to get a seat near the front. The room filled up quickly with concerned parents and curious residents, many of whom I recognized from the pool that day. Curtis arrived in his animal control uniform and nodded at me before taking a seat across the aisle. The primary lifeguard came in looking nervous, sitting in the back row like he wanted to disappear. The pool manager was already at the front table with the board members, shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact with everyone. The board president called the meeting to order and announced they'd hear public comments about the pool incident before discussing next steps. Curtis went first, standing at the podium with his official report in hand. He explained in his calm, professional voice how his department had received 7 separate gator sighting calls near the pool area over the past 2 months. He showed photos of the fence gap on the overhead projector, pointing out the rust patterns that indicated years of deterioration. He mentioned that standard protocol would have been to inspect and secure any public facility after the first sighting report, but no inspection request had come from the pool management. The board members took notes while the pool manager's face got redder and redder. When Curtis finished, the primary lifeguard walked slowly to the podium, his hands visibly shaking. He told them about the safety memo he'd submitted 6 weeks ago requesting fence repairs and additional safety equipment. He pulled out his phone and showed them the email receipt proving he'd sent it to the pool manager, who had replied that it would be addressed in the next budget cycle. He described how he'd been told to stop being paranoid when he suggested doing perimeter checks before opening each day. His voice got stronger as he talked, and I could see other lifeguards in the audience nodding along with his testimony. My turn came next, and my legs felt like jelly as I walked to the podium. I opened my folder and spread out my evidence, starting with the timeline I'd created from my smartwatch data. I showed them the heart rate spikes, explaining what was happening at each peak, my voice getting steadier as I focused on the facts. I displayed the fence photos on the projector, zooming in on the gap and the rust, then showed Curtis's screenshots of the prior sighting reports. The board members leaned forward, one of them asking me to go back to the timeline slide. Another asked if I'd needed medical treatment for shock, and I told her about the paramedics' recommendation and my ongoing counseling sessions with Jada. When I finished and sat down, my whole body was shaking, but I felt proud of myself for speaking up. 3 more residents testified about seeing gators near the pool in previous weeks and reporting it with no response. A mother described how her kids had been swimming right where the shallow end gator was hiding just minutes before the evacuation. The board members huddled together for a whispered discussion before the president announced they were ordering immediate fence repairs with self-closing gates and professional wildlife barriers. They also mandated an independent review of all pool safety protocols and management decisions from the past year. The pool would remain closed until these measures were completed and verified by outside inspectors. The room erupted in scattered applause while the pool manager slumped in his chair. After the meeting adjourned, I was gathering my papers when the pool manager cornered me near the exit. He suggested we could work out an arrangement that would help me move past this trauma while protecting everyone's interests. He pulled out a document from his briefcase, mentioning compensation and closure, but I recognized it as a non-disclosure agreement from the header. My fear of authority transformed into something harder as I looked him in the eye and told him no, then walked around him and out the door. That night, I woke up at 3 a.m. gasping for air, my sheets soaked with sweat from a nightmare about drowning in dark water. I sat up and used the technique Jada had taught me, looking around my room and naming 5 things I could see: my dresser, my lamp, my water bottle, my phone, my closet door. Then 4 things I could touch: the soft sheets, the cool wall, my damp hair, the carpet under my feet. 3 things I could hear: the ceiling fan, a car passing outside, my own breathing slowing down. 2 things I could smell: my lavender lotion, the faint scent of dinner still in the air. 1 thing I could taste: the mint from my toothpaste. By the time I finished, my heart rate was normal, and I could breathe again. The next day, Seth texted asking if he could post an update about the board meeting with my permission. We worked together on the wording, making sure it focused on the systemic failures and the safety improvements rather than drama or blame. He posted it that afternoon, and within hours, the comments shifted from attacking me to supporting accountability and prevention. 2 days later, I drove to the animal control facility where Curtis worked, wanting to see the captured gators before they were relocated to a wildlife preserve. Curtis met me in the lobby and walked me back to the holding area where 3 large containers sat with air holes and locks. Through the reinforced glass viewing window, I could see the big one that had circled beneath me, resting calmly in shallow water inside its transport container. It looked different here, just an animal that had wandered into the wrong place, not the monster from my nightmares. Curtis walked me back out to my car and mentioned they'd be moving the gators to a preserve next week. I thanked him for everything and drove home with my hands still shaking on the wheel. That weekend, Jada texted asking if I wanted to try swimming at the indoor rec center pool. My stomach turned just thinking about water, but I knew I had to face this fear somehow. The indoor pool was smaller and shallower with no way for wildlife to get in. I changed into my suit with trembling fingers and met Jada by the shallow end. She stayed right next to me as I lowered myself into the 3-foot section. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to push off from the wall. I managed 3 short laps before my breathing got too fast and I had to stop. Jada helped me out and we sat on the bench while I calmed down. It wasn't much, but after weeks of avoiding water deeper than my bathtub, it felt huge. She reminded me that healing takes time and every small step counts. A few days later, Seth forwarded me an email from someone at the city. The primary lifeguard who saved me had gotten promoted to provisional pool supervisor during the closure. Reading that news made my whole week brighter, knowing my ally was moving up. The city's investigation report came out the following week, confirming everything we'd suspected. They found maintenance failures going back months and inadequate safety protocols throughout the facility. The pool manager was placed on probation and required to complete additional training courses. Reading the official findings felt like vindication, without having to gloat about being right. They announced the pool would reopen in 2 weeks with major safety upgrades completed. When reopening day arrived, I drove past to see the changes for myself. The new fence stood 8 feet tall with self-latching gates that clicked shut automatically. Warning signs about local wildlife were posted every 20 feet along the perimeter. Seeing these concrete changes made me feel cautiously hopeful about community safety. I parked and walked through the new gates with my swim bag. The shallow end had families splashing around like nothing had ever happened. I changed in the locker room and forced myself to walk to the pool edge. The water looked clear and safe with the new supervisor watching from his chair. I slipped into the shallow end and started swimming slow laps near the edge. After 2 laps, I climbed out calmly on my own terms without panic or rushing. This wasn't about conquering fear, but rebuilding trust in my own judgment about safety. That night, I sat at my computer and started writing my own account of what happened. I posted it on my social media with clear boundaries about media requests and interviews. Several news outlets had reached out, but I wanted to control my own narrative first. Taking charge of my story felt like reclaiming agency after weeks of feeling powerless. Seth messaged me the next day saying he'd implemented a new personal rule about consent. He wouldn't post anything involving other people without asking them first. Our friendship had been strained, but this showed he understood what he'd done wrong. We started texting again and slowly rebuilding on a foundation of better boundaries. The pool manager approached me awkwardly at the grocery store a week later. He thanked me for pushing for the safety improvements even though it had been hard for him. I accepted his thanks with guarded grace, knowing people can learn from their mistakes. He seemed genuine about wanting the pool to be safer for everyone. The local news station called asking if I'd participate in a segment about pool safety. They wanted to use my incident as a teaching moment for the community. I agreed as long as they focused on prevention, rather than sensationalizing what happened. The segment aired that Thursday night with tips about checking fences and watching for wildlife. They interviewed the new supervisor about the safety protocols and showed the improvements at our pool. Seeing the focus on education rather than drama felt like the right kind of attention. Curtis called me after watching the segment and invited me to speak at a wildlife education event. The community center was hosting a session about coexisting safely with Florida's natural predators. I hesitated at first, but realized my experience could help others stay safe. We met for coffee to discuss what I'd cover and how to make it educational without being scary. The event was scheduled for next month, and Curtis would be there to answer technical questions. I started preparing notes about what I'd learned about gator behavior and pool safety. Turning my trauma into useful knowledge for others felt like a positive way forward. 3 months passed before I felt ready to swim laps again, but when I walked through the renovated pool gates, everything looked different. The fence stood 8 feet tall now with self-closing gates that clicked shut behind each person. Warning signs about local wildlife covered the entrance area with pictures of gators and instructions for reporting sightings. I changed into my suit and walked to the shallow end where other morning swimmers nodded at me with recognition. The water felt cool against my skin as I pushed off from the wall and started my first lap, staying close to the edge. My strokes stayed smooth and controlled while I counted each breath and kept my eyes open underwater, scanning for shadows that weren't there. After 4 laps, I climbed out and sat on the edge watching the new supervisor run his morning safety check. He walked the entire perimeter, testing each gate latch and checking for gaps in the fence before giving the all-clear signal. 2 other swimmers stopped to thank me for pushing the city to make these changes, and I just nodded, feeling weird about being thanked for almost becoming gator food. The supervisor came over and showed me the new daily log they kept tracking wildlife sightings and fence inspections. Every shift started with a full perimeter walk, and they ran monthly evacuation drills, now treating pool safety like the serious responsibility it was. Seth texted me a link to his new community safety page where he posted wildlife sightings with proper location tags and safety reminders. He'd gotten over 2,000 followers already, and worked with animal control to share accurate information instead of sensational videos. The page had a clear policy about getting consent before posting anything involving other people, and he credited sources properly. Curtis had helped him set up partnerships with local wildlife groups to provide educational content between sighting reports. The wildlife education event came faster than I expected, and I stood at the community center podium looking at 50 parents and kids waiting to hear my story. My hands shook slightly as I clicked through the slides showing pool safety tips and gator behavior facts Curtis had helped me prepare. I talked them through what happened using simple terms the kids could understand, while emphasizing the importance of listening to lifeguards and respecting wildlife. Parents took notes on their phones, and several asked specific questions about fence maintenance and what to look for at their own community pools. Curtis answered the technical questions about gator behavior, while I focused on the human side of pool safety and emergency response. Seeing kids raise their hands to ask questions and watching parents exchange concerned looks about their own pool security made the whole presentation worth the nervousness. The city council meeting 2 weeks later brought news that permanent budget increases had been approved for all recreation facilities. The recreation director presented a 5-year plan for systematic safety upgrades across every public pool and park in the county. Our incident had triggered a complete review that found similar maintenance delays at 6 other facilities. They allocated funds for quarterly professional inspections and immediate repair protocols that couldn't be delayed by budget concerns. Jada scheduled what she called our final session, though she said I could always come back if needed. We sat in her office reviewing the progress charts she'd kept showing how my anxiety scores had dropped and my confidence in water situations had improved. She pointed out how I'd moved from victim to advocate and found purpose in making sure nobody else faced the same preventable danger. The healing hadn't erased what happened, but had integrated it into something useful for the community. A full year after the incident, I arrived for my regular morning swim at what had become a model facility for wildlife-safe public pools. The manager who'd once tried to silence me now gave tours to other facility managers explaining each safety feature and the inspection protocols. 3 neighboring counties had adopted our safety standards, and the state was considering making them mandatory for all public pools. I slipped into the water and started my laps with strong, confident strokes, while the supervisor watched from his elevated chair. We exchanged a brief nod of acknowledgement as I passed his station, knowing we'd both played a part in these changes. Other morning regulars swam their own laps in the lanes beside me, and new families arrived for swim lessons in the shallow end. The pool that had almost killed me had become the safest in the state, because we'd refused to let them sweep the danger under the rug. My morning routine felt peaceful now, with the sun warming the deck, and the water clear enough to see the painted lines on the bottom. The fear hadn't disappeared completely, but had transformed into healthy awareness and respect for the wildlife we shared this space with. Every splash and movement in my peripheral vision still made me look, but no longer made me panic. The community had learned from my experience and turned a terrifying incident into lasting positive change that would protect swimmers for years to come. Thanks for sticking with me through all this. It's definitely been a journey worth sharing. Until we meet again, folks, if you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.